There are few things that get me more excited than waking up on a Monday and seeing that Adventures in Poor Taste has done an interview with somebody that I've been talking about here on the channel, specifically bad creators, like maybe a Jordan White, a Leah Williams, a Vita Ayala. This week, they interviewed Tini Howard. Are you freaking kidding me? What is it? Fucking Father's Day already? I was over the moon. I couldn't wait to get into it, and my goodness, she gives away so much good information here. You can really see that Tini Howard would like to be doing a lot of things other than writing comic books. And just some of the stupid shit she says is just, it's, chef's kiss. Thank you so much, Adventures in Poor Taste. Thank you very much, Tini Howard, for exposing yourself as the hack writer we've been talking about here on Thinking Critical. Specifically, Doc, he's been on the forefront of this. I don't want to take credit away from him. He's a lot of times has said, this is Tini Howard's weird Dungeons and Dragons fanfic. He's a lot of times he said she doesn't want to be writing X-Men. She doesn't want to be writing Marvel. She doesn't want to be writing action comics. She wants to be writing her weird LARPing stuff. And it turns out he was right. She talks all about it in this interview. It comes through in the writing. It comes through in the storycraft, the storytelling. Every single Tini Howard comic book at Marvel and now at DC, because she's doing Catwoman, just sucks. The dialogue is terrible. They're really long-winded. They're really decompressed stories. And you can just tell she wants to hit on every aspect of the character, but who the character is and what they represent, because she's not interested in comic books. But no one else wants to hire her, so apparently she's got, a place at the table in eternity at Marvel Comics because, she's not a dipshit like some of the other creators. But this is so good. Wait till I get into it. Let's get into some of these questions and some of the answers, and you're going to see Tini Howard has no interest actually in comic books. First question. In addition to her own mutant abilities, what powers does Betsy Braddock have as Captain Britain? Tini Howard says, so if you're a tabletop RPG person, like if you play games with dice and dragons, and maybe a dungeon or two, I'll use that to explain. The term used in gaming sometimes is splat, which is like a job class, prestige class, basically like an extra job for your character that you would theoretically lay over top your existing character sheet. Splat. Let's say Betsy's our character. She has inherent psychic powers. No one can take away from her. But in her role as Captain Britain, she gets additional abilities. And those are more or less the ones Brian was afforded. Flight, etc. I think her strength is certainly enhanced. She runs around in armor and carries a shield. She's much more physical in this role than she has been previously. So instead of Hulk-like strength, it manifests itself more through a general improvement in her physicality. I think even the strongest average human would tire out long before her in her Captain Britain mode. This nimwit gets asked a question about comic books from a comic book website and can't even answer it in comic book speak. Now, I'm not here to say if you tabletop game, like you're wrong or something, or there are no tabletop gamers in comic books. I say geek out how you want to geek out. But when you're writing comic books, you should be writing the comic books and thinking about the characters from a comic book perspective, probably not from the perspective of Dungeons and Dragons and splatting your characters. That's why we get all these stupid mantle swaps, because they don't see these things, these powers, as inherent to the core of who the characters are. These are just extra abilities you hand out with your cards while you're playing Dungeons and Dragons. Can you see how this could go wrong? Can you see how when you have that interview with Leah Williams, and she's talking about all power levels are meaningless. You just assign them to people randomly, however you want to splat your character, because that's how we do it when we tabletop game. This isn't tabletop games, and if you really want to do Dungeons and Dragons, there's nothing wrong with that. You'll be a writer for the Dungeons and Dragons, creative team, or go write the Dungeons and Dragons fucking comic book. I would be shocked if there isn't a line of Dungeons and Dragons novels that come out on a yearly basis. Tini Howard's probably perfect for something like that. She understands the concepts, and when she thinks about her characters and their power sets and the way they interact with each other, she thinks about them from a Dungeons and Dragons perspective, not a comic book perspective. Brian, as Captain Britain, is more than just a splat. You don't just get to take it off the character and hand it to somebody else. That's why this stuff never works and always comes through as so lame, because you're not a fucking comic book writer. I understand you like fantasy. I like fantasy too. I like fantasy comics, but I don't want your RPG rule sets to be incorporating and dictating the way my comic books work. Hey, I like it and die, okay? I liked it in Die because that was, kind of a D&D kind of game inspired comic book. It was kind of fun. It was cool for that comic book, but it's not right for the X-Men. And that's why Tini Howard is not right for the X-Men. You don't believe me that there's 100 other things that Tini Howard would rather be doing than writing comic books? She elaborates with another question. Of course, it wasn't about LARPing or RPG tabletop, but that's what she talks about. AIPT, how do you keep a cast of 10 characters represented through a run? It just seems like herding cats with a cast that large, but you always seem to manage it so well. And that's one way to describe it, I guess. Tinny answers, thank you so much, because it's insanely hard. To go back to fantasy role-playing, I've done a lot of it in my life. And to end this interview on a chillingly nerdy note, I LARP like twice a month for about 10 years solid. I met my husband Blake that way, and more than a few of my best friends. That's live action role-playing, and if you look it up on YouTube and think less of me, I'm sorry. The point of exposing that embarrassing fact is that LARPing is something where you really rapidly watch societies, characters, teams, and relationships form by real people making fake choices about fake characters in real time. And then everyone has to fight a Dracolic or something, so everyone comes together and does that. And in those large groups, I was always really aware of everyone there and everyone's stories. In a large LARP group, you end up with total cast of characters 3 or 4 times over, and they're all fully realized characters interacting in really interesting ways that complicate everything. I credit that experience with my ability to not get lost in it, I guess. Also, I once said in a meeting out loud, what if there were 10 knights because they're the Knights of X, LOL? And then everyone liked the idea, so I was stuck with them. I've dealt with nerds pretty much my entire life. I was intelligence when I was in the military. I worked with one guy that was a LARPer. We didn't hang out. He smelled funny. But that doesn't mean LARPers are bad. But stop trying to LARP in my X-Men comic books. Why do you keep bringing stuff back to all the stuff that you would rather be doing? Why don't you go write a television series about 10 friends that are LARPing and how fun that is? And like half the series will be in real life. And then when they LARP, like you could use real CGI and stuff and make it more exciting. I think you would love doing that because it's clear that you don't want to write comic books. You don't want to write X-Men. Like I said, geek out how you want to geek out. I'm not here to judge anybody, but fuck. You're supposed to be writing X-Men comics. This is like the most exciting team comic book in the world. X-Men is bigger than Avengers, and it's bigger than Justice League. And it's absolutely falling flat. It's ripping apart the seams because they can't bring in people that actually like X-Men and want to write comic books. She wants to LARP it. Like, get out of here with this stuff. I'm glad she met her husband there or whatever. She really got something out of it. And I bet she has a lot of friendships from LARPing as well. And I bet it was interesting keeping a track of people's fake lives that they're talking about. But describing comic book characters as people LARPing in real life, the people in real life don't actually have the powers. They're faking having the powers. Like in the story, the people should actually have the powers. Maybe that's why this stuff doesn't matter to them, because they think of Nightcrawler as LARPing as this true blood Catholic teleporter. But, if you LARP, you can kind of just change the character. You never fully invested it. I would have changed my character this week. So now he's not really invested all that much in Catholicism. Now he wants to make up his own new religion based on a bunch of hocus pocus going on. Or despite everything that's gone on in the history of X-Men, of course they would bring back Cassandra Nova. She never really did anything that bad. I've decided to tweak the history of the character that I'm LARPing now, so that never really happened anyway. That's kind of how they're treating the characters, and it comes through in the writing, the storycraft, and all the things that are wrong with comic books. I don't know Tini Howard. I've listened to a couple of interviews. She seems perfectly nice, but she's a shitty comic book writer, and you can see why. Her mind is everywhere but writing fucking comic books. She did talk about her Knights of X book. It was a couple of things that Doc and I had actually talked about when we reviewed the comic book. We talked about how shitty it was. This is the first question. At which place in their relationship would you say Richter and Shatterstar are at as of Knights of X #1? Also, how are they going to work together in this new era that is different from the previous era? Titty says, I think they're deeply attracted to one another, but a bit cautiously together again. They've been staying at the same place, and it's lovely to fall back into that easy intimacy with someone you just understand really well. I think we'll see things that challenge them because, as above, that's what makes for good stories in a relationship. I don't think challenges with coupled up characters are a make-up, break-up thing. I think it's about setting characters up against, around, and with the most important to them, and seeing what choices they make. I think Love Changes Us is, in a lot of ways, the simplest and best 3-word story there is. Listen, I'm married. I'm certainly in love, and love certainly did change me. But I'm not trying to read the fucking Notebook comic. You know what I'm saying? These are supposed to be action-based stories, and we're not getting that because the creators don't get it. And talking about Richter and Shatterstar being cautious, you literally showed them the very first time together in your series into bed post-coitus. Their pants weren't on. They were obviously naked in bed together. Oh, you think they're being cautious? Well, I hope they're using protection. Is that what you're talking about? Because it doesn't seem like they're being all that cautious to me. Like, where do you get this stuff? There's another question she answers that Doc and I specifically have brought up about Knights of X #1 I wanted to get to. Question. We're looking at a very different Gambit from the end of Excalibur, who was kind of just having fun. Is he feeling a bit lonely or left behind as Rogue's time with the X-Men continues? Tini, I'm glad you're clocking that. As someone who's been married to my very best friend for a long time, having to be separated for work can be hard. Remy and Rogue are both passionate heroes, but their work takes them elsewhere, and even being understanding of that doesn't repair all the sadness that comes from just being away from your best friend and lover. Coming to understand our feelings around that part is growth, and Gambit's growing. They love each other so much. Gambit and Rogue have been around for a very long time. They've kind of explored their relationship. You trying to redefine it and making Gambit a sad sack piece of shit is pretty lame. They know sometimes they're going to be apart. I bet they're over the getting sad phase. They're not in high school anymore. They're not even in college. These two have been together for very, very many years, and they've gone on their own separate adventures when it was necessary. Don't think it was this time, but hey, you got to have 10 nights because she said, what if I call it Knights of X and it was 10 nights because that's so funny. And that's how the comic book came into existence. That's what Jordan White accepted as a good pitch and idea for the name of the title and the future of the story. I've said this from day one. A vast majority of the writers in the X-Men office shouldn't be there. They're absolute crap writers. They don't know comic books. They don't know heroes. Most of them would rather be doing anything else in the world, but somehow they got an X-Men writing gig because Jordan White is a card-carrying member and leader of the Legion of Doofuses, and he just doesn't know any better. He's so incompetent that he can't hire people that would be good X-Men writers, shockingly. If you don't believe me about Knights of X and just how bad this thing is, Doc and I actually talked about this in last week's This Week in X-Men. This was a fun review because this comic book sucked so bad. And Doc was just so mad doing it. Like, he was pissed off making this video because he doesn't love Excalibur, but he likes Chris Claremont's Excalibur. And he likes some of the ideas that are being talked about, but he hates the execution on every single page. It was beautiful.